Listen up. This is the Construction Mentor Podcast. My name is Ike. I am your host. Why am I here? We are here to promote the construction industry. There is no better industry for you to pursue a career in if you want to achieve affluency, if you want to provide an above average or even upper class lifestyle for your family. If you want to take your career to the next height, if you're already in the construction industry, we want to make sure that you have the tools, the resources, and the references to take that as high as you possibly want to go. Today, I have somebody who is not necessarily in the industry, but directly relates to a lot of what I just talked about in the intro, right? If you want to pursue a career, you might want to talk to a recruiter. You might be interested in what the job market has to say, what opportunities are out there. And if you're like anybody in my comment section right now from the post that I shared yesterday, whining about the job that you're in or your current compensation or your inability to find a job, you may want to know somebody like George Arnold. So welcome, George, from across the pond. I think you can figure out where he's from his accent. George, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm all right. So, George, part of your focus is recruiting, which would be job placement for people in the construction industry. What's the name of the company and what type of people are you placing?
Yeah, so we're Hyperion Partners. We're a UK-based headhunting firm, and typically we're placing people that are superintendents or project managers on the east coast of the USA.
On the east coast of the USA, so he's reaching across the pond to put people in place, which is great. And project managers, are we talking about subcontractors, general contractors?
Yeah, for the most part, general contractors. We do both, but most of our clients so far have been general contractors. Yeah.
Okay. So again, just for those of you who don't know, what he means when he says a superintendent is that's like, if I relate it to a football team, that's like your quarterback on the field. Okay. So if you are a superintendent, you're in charge of the day-to-day activities on site. You typically don't lift a finger or get dirty unless you really want to, but you are coordinating everybody on site. Everything that happens on that job site is under your watch and direction, right? If you are the PM, then it's almost like you're the coach on the sideline calling the plays, right? You want to call the right plays so that your quarterback can have success in the field. It's up to you to put the game plan together to make everybody successful on the field, right? And to lead the team. So those are two very, very important positions. And I think it's critical that people understand what they are, and that, again, I always refer to my comment section. One of the things that always comes up in my comment section are, people complain about, careers in the trades or careers in construction being dead end or being stuck in the field and, using their bodies their entire lives. Project managers and supers are a great role to work yourself into. A lot of the best ones do come out of the trades. I was a super and then a project manager for a long time. So are you not doing any recruiting in Canada or the UK for these positions?
Not for construction, no. So my business partner does the UK recruitment, but we don't do construction in the UK. I just do our North American practice, and that's the US. I do have some stats on the UK, which might explain why it's not quite the same here as it is over there.
Okay. Do you want to start there? Do you want to get right into stats that we've seen over the last year or so in construction employment?
Absolutely. Should I start with the US or with the UK?
Let's start with the US, because I think that a lot of people would be, obviously they want to know what's going on in their own backyard. A lot of our listeners are on the East Coast specifically. And then we do have some listeners over there. And I think it's just really interesting what's going on in other parts of the world. So let's start with the US and then go to the UK.
Agreed. Well, luckily for us, the employment figures came out literally last Friday. And the new data shows that the total employment in the US added about 114,000 jobs in July, which sounds like a big number, but it's a lot less than it was for the previous 2 months and much lower than the average for the whole of 2023, which is about 215,000. And that's leading to some people starting to talk about potentially a recession in the USA. But it's not doom and gloom for construction. They'd be happy to know, your listeners will be very happy to know that. And so actually, it's moving upwards. So in July, the construction added 25,000 jobs compared to the 12-month average of 19,000. In fact, since 2022, construction's remained pretty resilient as a sector, and it's consistently added about 20,000 jobs on average over that time period. So it's a great place to be working.
And what time is that? 20,000 jobs over the last?
So every month since about January 2022 until now, 20,000 new jobs across the whole of the country.
Yeah, 20,000 new jobs. If you applied that to every state, that'd be 400 jobs in every state per month. that are coming out there, and that's anybody in construction. That's not necessarily just supers and project managers.
Correct. Yeah. So most of these stats will cover is mainly the trades workers. So that's where a lot of that bulk will come from. But obviously the stuff I do is in there. But yeah, it covers the whole thing.
Well, it's important because
Yeah.
what is it? What is that a sign of? If you're
Yeah.
hiring more people and you need more people, then the demand is there. And for every handful of people in the field, there's a super you need. There's a project manager you need, right? You need people leading these teams. These aren't, if you have a lot of Indians, you need chiefs. for lack of a better word. I know people don't like that. But that's incredible. I mean, when you're looking at, jobs reports coming out, and out of all the industries that you could possibly work in America, and people get bummed when they see 100,000 jobs added or 20,000 jobs, 200,000 jobs added. The construction industry is consistently seeing 20,000 added a month, 60,000 a quarter. So whatever jobs are being added in America, that job growth is in large part construction.
Massively. In fact, it's one of the top 3 sectors. The only other 2 are private education and health services, and then the government jobs. So those are the only 2 other bigger growth areas. So construction is well up there.
Yeah, health services. So people are always going to be sick and dying as the population grows, the demand grows, right? Private education I find to be very interesting, although not surprising. I have kids and I plan on going private. But that's a different conversation. So again, people always ask me, is the construction industry dying? And there's just no evidence of that, because the younger generations don't seem to want to be interested, or maybe they just aren't aware. The industry is growing and the demand is growing, and job growth like that is incredible. So that's what we're seeing in America. What are we seeing where you're at in the UK?
Yeah, I think contextually for the UK, our records began back in 1997. And at that point, we had 1.8 million people working in the UK construction sector. We've had kind of 2 booms and busts in that. That's leading up to 2008. That was our growth. And then kind of post that with the financial crisis, leading up to 2019. And then the worldwide event that kind of brought everything to a crash after that. And so we've reached 2 peaks at about 2.5 million. And in Q1 of this year, the sector was again at just about 2 million. So we haven't, from 1997, which was 1.8, to 2024 is 2 million. We haven't grown that much over the time. And so looking forward, I think they're forecasting a very modest decline this year, 0.9%, a very modest growth next year of 1.5%. So it's a very different sort of sector in the UK at the moment.
Interesting. And what's the population of the UK? I have no idea.
No idea. 3-4 million, maybe more.
On the whole island, there's only 3 or 4 million people. It's got to be more than that.
66 million. I'm thinking of London. 66 million.
Okay, so I mean, my point being is that the states, number one, I mean, we have so many more major markets than you guys have. And I want to say in the mid 90s, our population was 200 million. Now it's 350 million, and it's grown quite a bit in the last couple of years for whatever reason. But that's huge growth, right? Like that's why that has a lot to do with why the demand is so different.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can tell you, we do work there, and there's no shortage of work, especially in London, especially downtown. So, that's interesting. 66 million people, and the job market. So when the construction industry, I'm just doing the math in my head right now. So 66 million people, 1.82 million seems to be the population for the construction industry. And if you multiply the population by 60 million times 5, you get 300 million, you get to ours. It's kind of the same thing for the construction industry. Our construction industry has 10 or 11 million people in it. So you go from the 2 times 5 to a 10 or an 11. It does seem to mirror the population, right? So I find that to be interesting. So we could go 2 different ways right now. I know I want to talk about apprenticeships. I want to talk about people in the field, but let's stick to supers and project managers really quick. Yeah. What are you seeing for compensation on the East Coast in the States for supers and PMs?
Yeah, I think I'm grouping candidates or job roles into 2 areas. You've got perhaps the smaller, more boutique companies, and they're typically offering $80 to $110,000 a year. And you've got the larger, more established firms, perhaps bigger projects, and that's anything from kind of 90 to 130, 135. So really, I kind of group clients into those two buckets.
And is it pretty much the same compensation for a super and a project manager, just different job descriptions?
It's very similar. I mean, there's a couple of thousand here or there, but they're actually quite similarly compensated. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, again, if you relate that to football, you're probably going to pay your quarterback a little bit more than you're going to pay your coach, or maybe even the same if you got Belichick and Brady. So that compensation, the 80 to 110 or the 90 to 130, what's the difference in experience? Like, what are the requirements to qualify for a position like that for a super and for a PM?
Yeah. So at the top end of the higher salary bracket, we're talking about a degree educated person with experience on almost identical projects at type, size, scale, and budget. The ability to prove through examples that they've been able to lead large teams and really manage things tightly. We're talking budgets, quality, time, cost control, risks. So that's the top end of that scale. The bottom end of the scale, maybe it's somebody from a trades background who's moving up into that first role. They've been a kind of senior supervisor, something along those lines, and moving up. I've seen a couple of people from adjacent sectors, manufacturing and the like, that have moved in at that bottom scale where they've got previous people experience and been able to move over. It's not common, but that's the kind of person we're probably seeing at the lower end of the market there.
So previous experience, but not in construction, but they think that it's relevant enough that they can make the transition into the construction industry.
Yeah, some clients are open to that. I mean, it's when you have more jobs than candidates. You have to be creative sometimes about what you're willing to be flexible on. If you can train that person up in certain areas and you've got a good team around them, you can make that work. Now, that's not everybody, but we have seen that for the kind of 80K mark.
And are they looking for a certain amount of years in the field versus working for another company? What's the length of experience that people are looking like to get into these positions? Because these are leadership roles, right? Like on a project, this is somebody that you don't ideally want to have to train. You're looking at a project manager or super, and it's supposed to be to a certain level plug and play, right? To be on that higher end, that $130,000, right? Yeah. So to be considered a plug and play type, how long do they have to be in the industry? What type of experience do they have?
Well, we've got candidates with 20 years experience at that top end of the market, and we've got candidates with kind of 7, maybe 5 if they're exceptional rising star kind of person. So I'd imagine somewhere between 5 and 7 at the lower end, and 20 plus at the top end. Because once you find a good super, I mean, we spoke to a client the other day, and they've got this one supervisor they always want to use for their projects because they've used him for 30, 40 years, and that client just wants that one person. So yeah.
And ratio, you think it's harder to find a super, or you think it's harder to find a PM?
It's harder to find a good super, definitely. I mean, I think we have a saying in the UK, it's like one man's trash is one man's treasure, and so there isn't a bad super or a really good super in everyone's eyes. It's how does that super work within your structure? What are they like with their consultants and their trade staff? And so you can be a great super on one project and a terrible super on another project, and sometimes you have to find the right project and the right company for you. So
yeah, I think in my experience, a lot of the young people, they come out, they want to be project managers as fast as possible. The super role just doesn't seem to appeal to them.
Yeah.
And it's supply and demand, right? Like I think we're at a place, and a lot of people are seeing it. I mean, I know supers that make north of the 130 mark. I know people in Boston that make 175 as a super. I know people in that work on major projects. Maybe they are building a football stadium or something like that, and they're the lead super, the general super, and they're making north of 200, right? Because not everybody can be a project manager. You can't just have all the coaches on the sidelines, right? Like you have to put people on the field. And the less that people want to do that, the more you're going to see people increase in compensation for the super position. Now, what does that mean? That means, a super, what are the differences? A project manager's in the field sometimes, maybe he's in a trailer, maybe he's going to the office, maybe they get to work from home a little bit more. but the super tends to have shorter hours sometimes, right? Like they can be gone and off the job site by 2, 3 in the afternoon. They're on the job. They're walking around with an iPad or a tablet, coordinating and making sure they're getting manpower counts and they're hitting their schedule and everyone's installing and according to the details and everything like that, right? The driving quality and schedule on the job and safety, of course. They get to wear boots and jeans on the job, a relatively relaxed dress code, maybe a polo. But there's pluses and minuses to both. And I think that there's a lot of people, young people out there that, hey, to be able to be 30 years old and be a super with 5 to 7 strong years experience, to have a resume that warrants that higher end, 130 grand to be a super, maybe they don't consider themselves to be a book smart guy, or they don't want to wear the slacks and the button up shirt and show up to the office every day. Like they like the blue collar world, but they want to be the so-called boss. Right. I think that's a good opportunity. And it's a situation that suits quite a lot of people, and they just don't realize how much money can be made doing that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think when you're younger, everyone knows what a project manager is. From a young age, you'll hear it and you'll kind of see it and feel it around you. I think that the super title is not something you really come into contact with unless you're in the construction field already. So no one dreams of being a super, by and large. Whereas I think you can understand, you can visualize what a project manager is, and it feels like it's technically more senior. But you're right. The super job is an incredible position, and some of those guys start super early. I'm talking 4 or 5 o'clock starts, but it's worth it.
And what are you seeing, or maybe you're not seeing it yet, but what are you hearing as far as college being a requirement to be a project manager or super?
Look, for most of the clients we're speaking to, it's the very least a very strong preference at this stage. And look, bear in mind, when they come to us as a headhunting recruitment agency, they've probably already tried to find these people themselves and not been able to through their direct methods or their adverts. So if they're going to pay a fee to us for finding that person, they tend to want to find a person that is deserving of that fee. And so typically when they're coming to us, they want the top end of the market with the qualifications, with everything else. Now I speak to a couple of the internal recruiters, and I know it's a preference, but they have found roles for people that haven't got those degree qualifications.
It sounds like it's a preference, maybe because I have the same conversation at my company too, and I don't know why. Especially for supers, we require a college degree. It's like if you're coming from the trades or you came from a VOTech, vocational technical high school, that's what we call them here in the States. I don't know what you call them over there, but there's no reason why, if you're a mechanically minded person, that you can't learn some leadership skills and learn the industry and run a project from the super seat. I think what I'm hearing is it's a requirement, especially if they lack experience, but the more experience they have, the more the relevance of the degree gets diluted.
Yeah, I think there's a crossover point where if you didn't get a degree originally in your career and you've come up through the trades and you've been a super and you've been doing it now for 10 years and you've got a great record and you can reference that and back it up, I think people are happy to waive the degree side of it because you can prove that you can do the job. But you're right, if there's a perhaps a more junior candidate or a candidate transitioning into a different role, then they're probably going to need a degree.
Yeah, you got to have something. You got to have something. And if you don't have work experience, a degree is not a bad way to do it. And typical degrees would be, they always say construction or something construction related, which to me is further evidence that they don't really care. It's just a box that they're trying to check, right? So what does construction related mean? That means architecture, engineering, civil engineering, sometimes manufacturing, because it's like putting things together. And then, people don't realize construction management is a degree. Right. That is a degree that people can go out there and get. Are there preferred schools that you see in different markets? I don't know which markets are your big, your biggest, demographic or where your clients are concentrated. But are there any schools that you'd recommend that you like to see in a resume that's like, like they went to Georgia Tech or something?
It's a really good question. It's not something we look at too closely, if I'm honest with you, because once you've got the degree, I think, and unless it's your kind of first, second role or an entry level role, it's probably so far in the past that it's more about the projects you've worked on. You highlight that, the size of the project, the stuff that you've done, the value of the projects. That seems to be more important. If it were a more junior position, it was like entry level super role, and they didn't have, or digital PM, they didn't have too much to show on their CV. We might then emphasize the college that they went to, but for the most part, we're focusing purely on the work that they've done. And that helps with us from the UK. We do a lot of kind of unconscious bias training and making things a little bit more even playing field to get into. And I think if you focus too much on where you've gone to get your degree, it creates an echo chamber, a kind of group think of the same type of person. So we try and avoid that, or help our clients avoid that where we can help them.
A lot of people, they misconstrue me. I am misunderstood. It's everybody else is the problem. Everybody else is the problem, and it's not me, right? I am not anti-education. I have a degree in engineering. I have an MBA. I would always advocate, if people, for the right reasons, if you want to go to college, go to college. It can be a very good thing. One of the themes that I've posted about lately and that I've discussed lately is that be conscious of where you go to college, and don't just go to a school because it's got a big name, or you think that it sounds good to roll off the tongue when you brag to your parents or your friends' parents, or they get to brag about you or to your friends, right? Because at the end of the day, as soon as you get that, you're a year or two in, or you get that second job, or really even that first job, like you just said, the fact that you have the degree and an appropriate degree is what matters. If it matters at all, because your job experience is going to overshadow that pretty quickly. But what I'm trying to say is, don't go spend $1 million on a degree that'll accomplish the same thing, that'll check the same box as a degree at a state school or at a community college. If you can get in and out of having that degree for $40,000 as opposed to $360,000 on a 6.5% interest rate for a total of $750,000, then I would spend the $40,000 to check that box, not $750,000 to check that box. Would you agree?
100%. Yeah, the market is growing. There are more jobs than there are people. You don't need to break the bank going to a top tier university when you can get the same thing and enter the market in the same conditions as you would going to a different one. So yeah, definitely agree.
Now, if you don't go to college, a great path is to get an apprenticeship and to start to pick up a trade. And you shared a stat with me, and I don't know if this is up to date as of last Friday, but the top 10 states for apprenticeships. Shall I?
Yes, yeah, please.
So if I read down this, California, number one, which doesn't surprise me because they have 6 major markets. They got 6 of the top 10 biggest cities, 6 of the top 20 biggest cities in the country in there. Texas, which is huge. And I don't think people understand the growth that's happening in the Austin and Dallas area specifically, and what's about to happen. And I don't know what the city's going to be called, but Elon Musk is building his own city. So they're going to need people for that. Illinois, which is obviously, Chicago, Ohio, which I think is bottom 5 states for cost of living, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Florida, and Missouri. So whatever state you're in, I think we got 5 red states and 5 blue states. No matter what type of state you're in, people are building, right? And what do we talk when we talk about these numbers of who has the top? What are these apprenticeships representing? What are we saying? Is it one trade? Is it just apprenticeships for all trades? Is it union trades? What are we looking at here?
Yes, the data only focuses on the total number of apprenticeships in that state that are in a construction field. It doesn't break it down into particular areas. But I think what apprenticeships are quite big in the UK, and we've been doing them for a very long time. I think what it shows me is that these are the states probably that are having the most a tough time recruiting for the right people. If you struggle to recruit people in that middle space because there aren't enough people of them, you've got to start the funnel coming up from the bottom, and that's how you start to build that whole talent pipeline. So these states, just by the number of apprenticeships they have, are probably the type of places that are worth going to start your career, because they have that treadmill that you need to start going on in order to move up quickly. Right.
So again, that's 220,000 apprenticeships throughout the U.S., and the majority of those look like they're concentrated in those 10 states, right? Not the majority, but a good chunk of those are concentrated within those 10 states. So you pretty much throw a dart in a map. There's a demand for apprenticeships for you. Now, this other graph that you shared here, this is interesting because I'm going to share some negative numbers here too, but state employment changes from 2023 to 2024, May 23 to May 24. Is this an increase in construction professionals in each state?
Yeah, and I've got the most recent ones for that. A lot of them are quite similar, but so we've got
Okay.
the top 10 increase in states from June till June, and then we've got the bottom 5. Yeah.
So do you want to read off by state, each state, and how much they increased?
Of course, yeah. So the top 10, Texas is an increase in 36,000, Florida 29, Nevada 12, California 11,900, Virginia 10,700, Missouri 10,100, Indiana 8,100, Louisiana 8,500, North Carolina 8,400, and Washington 9,700, which would be a little bit different than what you've got there. So it's good to see which ones have changed in that month. But for the most part, the big ones are still there.
And that's incredible because you look at some of these states and you have Texas has over 800,000 construction professionals, Florida over 600,000, California is almost 1 million, Michigan 200,000. Just to give you some perspective here, North Carolina 257,000 construction professionals, Ohio 235,000 construction professionals. So you're seeing growth in all these big states, major markets. Not even major markets. Some of those aren't major markets. I would call them like if you had a sports team there, that's like a C-level market, right? Like the Charlotte Hornets or whatever football team's losing in Ohio next week. So that's incredible growth. Now there are some that are on the downtrend. Talk about those. You may or may not have any insight to this, but what states are on the downtrend for construction jobs?
Yes, I'll read the 5 from last and the 5 from this month because the 3 overlap and one surprised me, I'll be honest. So we got for the last month it was Oregon, which is minus 1,700, Colorado minus 2,300, Pennsylvania minus 300, Washington minus 3,900, and Maryland minus 500. The only 2 differences when it compares to this month for the last year is that we've got New York in there for minus 5,400. And District of Columbia is minus 700, and that was in place of Pennsylvania and Washington. So I wasn't expecting New York to creep into the bottom 5. I know it's been tough up there, but I just thought that they would have been able to keep out of that bottom 5.
That's very interesting to me. I look at some of these states in like Oregon, Colorado, not huge construction, professional populations, right? So when you see a 2,000 person drop, you're looking at, maybe like a 2 to 4% drop, whatever that is. Pennsylvania, kind of surprised by that because you got Philly, you got Pittsburgh, you have a couple major cities in there to see what looks like almost a 1% drop there. And then to hear New York is interesting. But, when you consider the population decline that they've had, maybe that has something to do with it. However, California's had a population decline and they just went up. So I don't know. But that's very interesting. But I will say out of the bottom 5, these are very small populations of people that it's contracting. Yeah. You have the top states increasing by 40,000. You have the bottom states decreasing by 2,000.
Exactly, and that overall means that the whole sector is still growing. So, I guess between the apprenticeships of knowing where people are, where the young people are starting to get the roles, and the list of where the states that are growing the most and those that are growing the least. If you're starting your formal education or trying to get into the sector, I'd be looking at one of the big growing areas that do apprenticeships. Definitely.
Interesting. Now, so let's just recap what we've gone over. So the sector's growing, typically 20,000 jobs added per month. Apprenticeships, we got over 200,000 apprenticeships throughout the United States. A lot of that mirrors the states that are doing well for construction projects. You're seeing growth in the top 10 between 20%, 20% or so or more. In the middle states, when you get to the middle of the road, you're looking at like a 3% growth. And then when you get down to the bottom states, you're looking at like a 1 to 3% reduction. The next stat that you had was employment. And we have percentages. So what are we looking at here?
Yeah. So this was to take account for how big a state is. It's no surprise that Florida and Texas are at the top by the sheer volume of people that are being hired. But
Mhm.
when you take into account for the number of people already in that sector, so those that are growing at a faster rate, that was a little bit different. So here we can see Alaska grew 20.40%.
So this is total jobs regardless of industry.
Yeah, well, this is just construction. So
Oh, just construction. Okay.
16,700 jobs in May last year in construction, and 20,100 jobs in construction May this year. So that's
Oh, wow.
a normal increase in number as a percentage. Obviously, it's still
Got
a
it.
small number, but you've got to
So-
think in that. Yeah.
Okay. So what you're saying is, although they didn't make the top 10 list, because 4,000 jobs added isn't as much as 7,000 jobs added in Ohio, but they only have 16,000 people to begin with. So when you add 4,000, that's a huge jump. Okay, so the top two states are in the what we call not the lower 48, Alaska and Hawaii. So you got the tundra and you got the beautiful island with the palm trees. 20 and 10%. That's interesting. And the interesting thing that I find about Hawaii, I don't know if you know this, but or if it was big news where you were at, but the fires that happened last year.
Yeah.
So they were already short, I want to say 50,000 construction professionals on that island or in that state. So it's good to see that it's increasing, but that's falling way short of the demand.
100%. As we go down the list, I guess the two, because it would make sense for the smaller ones to have a greater impact as a percentage, the big ones have a greater impact as the number. But we've got Michigan and Nevada here, who have quite large numbers of people employed. So it's 186,000 last year for Michigan, and this year 204,000, so an increase of 8.4% or 8.40%. So again, considering it is quite a large number already, to have that big increase, there's something happening in Michigan. Definitely, and Nevada's a similar amount, 111 to 120, increase of 8.10%. So there's something in the waters in Michigan and Nevada.
Well, and the next 6 states are very small states with some substantial growth. You got South Dakota, Montana, and West Virginia all have around 30,000 construction professionals, but went up 6 to 7%. That's incredible. Yeah. You've got Alabama and Missouri, which are more towards the medium size, which would be like 100 to 150,000 people, that also had 6% growth. So we're seeing growth in places that you definitely wouldn't even call a big market in America.
Yeah. And that's good. That's good. I think the jobs are being spread across the whole of the US, and that can only mean good things for employment, good things for getting that job locally to you. I know a lot of people have to move states and across the country to get the jobs that they really want. I think this equalizing of roles across the country is going to be really good for the sector.
One of the things that I always like to talk about is the freedom that the construction industry can give you. And if you look at these numbers, like when you get a skill set in construction, you can take that anywhere, right? Like if you go work at Walmart or a store in retail or something like that, like you're kind of hamstrung. Like you only have a certain set of skills that you can work in certain markets, right? I mean, if you work at an Apple store and you're really good with Apple phones, you can only work where there's an Apple store, which tends to be a bigger market. But construction, you can take those skills and you can go live in a California, in a Texas, in a Florida, where, these are big markets with booming construction markets, right? Or you could also, if you want to move to Arkansas, South Dakota, Montana, Missouri, West Virginia, or Alabama, and you want to take your career there because you want maybe a simpler lifestyle, maybe you like it a little more rural, you can live a very good lifestyle in these markets and not be there for any other reason than just to watch, college football or attend a university there, right? So the demand, you've sufficiently illustrated the demand across the board in America, right? There's no one hub for it, which is incredible. The overall, so before we come up on time, we have the total forecast of the whole industry. Can you speak to this chart? And I believe it's dollars spent on construction in the United States versus how many people that employs or how many people that demands to be employed.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So it's a chart by the Associated Builders and Associated Builders and Contractors model, and it uses a model that predicts how much spending is in construction and how many people that will then require to fulfill that need. Mm-hmm. And so they predict that for every extra £1 billion worth of spending in construction, the US will need 3,550 people to meet that. And so for the whole of 2024, they'll think they need about an extra 500,000 people on top of the normal pace of hiring, which
Yeah.
is just, it's phenomenal.
Yeah. So an extra 500,000 people, an extra 500,000 people, and we call them dollars here. We don't call them pounds, but I'll let
Sorry.
I'll let that slide. I'll let that slide. For an extra 500,000 people, you're talking about a $10.8 million person industry. To increase that by 500,000, it's a lot of people. That's a 5% increase, right? So that's incredible growth, and this is trending upward. The only time that we've ever really seen a significant dip in this was when a lot of things came to a halt in 09, 10, 11, and hopefully that doesn't happen again. And there's a whole reason to that, right? But what I would always encourage people to do is get involved in service work as much as you can. You want to be able to build new projects, whether that's an interior renovation or you want to do, ground up projects, something new coming out of the ground. But the service work will bring you through that, right? Because we have billions of square feet of existing buildings and homes throughout the United States or in any country that you're in, and they all need to be maintained and renovated and things need to be replaced, right? So they're true. As long as you position yourself well, you can really weather the storm in any situation. Now, average pay. So we talked about pay for supers and project managers before. Talk to me about the average pay across the U.S., these numbers that we're looking at here.
Yeah, so it's tough with the US because it's such a big country and each state has its own little macro bits. So these are as my trigger was my warning, this is very, very average. But it's saying that the top earners as an annual salary will be about $38,000 typically.
$138,000.
$138,000 a year.
That's it.
Correct.
Big difference.
And then the average in the middle then is $95,168. And then the 75th percentile, so the gap between the average and the top. So if you're kind of the upper earner, but not quite the top, is $115,500. And then the percentile below the average, so not the bottom, but between the bottom and the average, is $71,000. And that's everything from trades to the top. So it's the full construction pay as an average.
Yeah. So let's see. It's all relative, right? So if you look at all earners in the United States, the average is like $55,000, $60,000 a year. Okay. The worst earners in construction are making 71 is what George just told you. Okay. So if you are the worst earner in the construction industry, you are still doing better than the average American. Not too bad, right? If you want to be,
that's good.
if you want to be average in construction, you are still doing better. You're doing 50% better than the average American. You're making in the 90s, right? If you want to kick ass and be above average, right? If you want to be like a B+, A- level player in construction, you're making double what the average American makes, right? You're up around, the $115,000 mark, $120,000 mark. And if you want to be a top earner, which I want to say only 3% of Americans make more than $150,000 a year. So if you want to be in the top in construction, you're looking at around $135,000, $140,000 a year, which is, what is that? 2.5 times the average American, right? So if you want to be a top earner in the construction industry before you even become an owner, you're probably just an ace, a foreman, a top project manager, some sort of an executive. You're making $140,000, no problem. And that is 2.5 times that of the average American, right? Nothing wrong with that.
No, go for it. It's there to be done. Somebody has to get these jobs. So if it isn't you, it'll be somebody else.
Yeah, right. So, as far as job markets on the East Coast, could you just name a couple that you see as being the higher paying markets? And it's probably just reflective of the cost of living. But do you have examples of like a few markets that pay a little bit higher and a few that pay a little bit lower?
I mean, for the most part, a lot of the stuff what we do is in Florida. And so we're seeing that the Florida market is probably slightly above these salaries here. As we go up the East Coast, it kind of dips down a little bit, and then it goes up to New York, and then it starts to go up. So there's kind of a bell curve in the middle there. Kind of around the Dakotas is probably the dip in the middle, somewhere like that.
Got it. Okay. Well, George, do you have anything else that you'd like to discuss, or do you have any advice for anybody that's out there wants to break in the industry or make a move?
I think if you're looking to break into the industry, I don't know if you have it. What I would advise here is you go do like a week's placement, a 2-week placement. Go find somebody who's in the sector, reach out to them, ask to shadow them for a week, get a feel for the industry. Because once you've got the bug for something and you love it, the education, the training, the hard work, the long hours, it becomes super easy once you know that that's the thing that you really want to do. So if you're unsure for now, go try it out for a week, 2 weeks, shadow somebody and work it out. Because once you're on the right path, it's going to be very easy to progress and move forward.
That's great advice. I would echo that. I can definitely appreciate that. And if they want some help from you to find an opportunity, who's the right person that you're looking to help, and how do they find you?
Yeah, it's same as we said. It's project managers and superintendents at all levels across the East Coast of the US. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm George Arnold, or at our website, which is Hyperion, spelled HYPERION -partners with an S.co.uk, because we're based in the UK. Awesome.
Well, they are based in the UK, but 95% of what we just talked about was in the States, so they can definitely help you out. What I see is a lot of people in construction that are really good at construction, or they're really enthusiastic about getting into construction. What I don't see is a lot of mentorship, and I don't see a lot of people who know the path, how to create an opportunity, how to find an opportunity, and how to market themselves for that opportunity. So especially if you can't find a mentor or somebody that can hold your hand to do that, a recruiter or a recruiting company is a great resource to leverage, because not only do they know, and not only can they help you and they want to help you, but they also have the demand, right? They have the people on the other sides to make the connection with. So they know who's looking for a job and who's hungry for talent. So that can just, having a matchmaker like that can just make it all the more easier. So George, I appreciate you coming on and giving us our jobs report for the year. I hope maybe we'll have you on again, maybe in a couple months at the beginning of the year. We'll do it again. We'll take a look at these numbers and see which way it's trending. Obviously, we have a big election coming, and usually there's a shift in the market. There was last time. So I appreciate you coming on. And again, this is the Construction Mentor Podcast. We're here to advocate, and promote the industry as an opportunity for you to find a life of affluence. You can catch it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and you can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at The Construction Mentor. Everybody be good.